PBO of South Africa, and then Cadbury's Mr. N. Cole. So shall we take that sequence? Maybe the first two speakers will kindly come to the front. So in the meanwhile, you have got a biography of, are you going to, Mr. Mkwatra, on page 17, essentially to say that he's in Action Aid Tanzania, and he's the National Project Coordinator on a project on strengthening social accountability and oversight in health and agriculture. So he'll be the first speaker, up to 10 minutes. I'll keep a record through the iPhone, but we'll allow some latitude. But before I hand over to him, maybe I should also extend a warm word of welcome to an ANC veteran and somebody who's been Speaker of this Parliament before, Max Sisulu. I'm sure he was welcomed. But I have a vested interest in welcoming him because, you see, he used to be very brutal when he was the Speaker. When I was given 10 minutes, at exactly 10 minutes, he used to say, "Order, stop." If I was given 8 minutes, at exactly 8 minutes he did that. So he's very disruptive and very cruel. So what I look forward to is him putting his hand up this afternoon so that I can tell him, Mr. Sisulu, your 30 seconds are over. Order. So please, Mr. Sisulu, I look forward to you putting your hand up. But having said that, a warm welcome to very much liked and loved Max Sisulu. Let me hand over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. And I must say I'm very poor when it comes to protocols, and I don't know why. Yeah, but all protocol reserved. That is what they say all. Anyway, now the issue that we are going to speak is on the public financing. And in fact, I don't have, of course I prepared something, but then I think I should not present it now due to the, due to the time. But also I want to talk much about the PBO because I know there are many experts here who knows it. But I will talk it as a layman point of view, but also I'll talk on the human right-based perspective. So, you know, I come from Action Aid, and Action Aid, please, can you, I don't know, it keeps coming. It's not the time that I want it to come now.
I'm not great at this, but I can try. How does this work? Just the left and right button. Okay, all right, fine.
Yeah, but what I want, I don't want to appear now. Oh, right. Because it is confusing the communication then.
All right.
Yeah, thank you. So, so what, as Action Aid, we are taking everything in human right perspective. And you all know that all these governments are there because they want, or there is a need to secure human right. Citizens are the one who chooses the government, are the one who choose people to be into power. And why do they do so? Because they have their fundamental rights of which they want to attain. So, in so doing, the government, when they are in the power, in fact, they have to make sure that they go to, they meet these human rights of which they are there for. Now, they cannot do that one unless they have something to help them do that one. And we all know that actually that we are talking on the financing. You cannot finance education if you don't have enough resources. So when you are talking about public financing, for us as Action Aid, we are looking to make sure that governments have the enough resources to make sure that basic human right needs are attained. So when we are talking on human right and public financing, we have a lot of things But one of it is that we are talking on the public resource management. This is very crucial, and most speakers who have actually said before me, they have been talking on the importance of public resource management. So as the action aid, you are looking to what extent public resource is managed. That is why we have various programs, as they have been said. So for that way, parliamentary budget offices, they are there just to help and to make sure that public resource is used as it is supposed to be used. Now, specifically for this project, now I think it is a time, we are going to work with the, yes, okay, please, can you, yes, okay, yeah. We'll just use first, from the first slide. No.
By the way, may I say, I've been told by PBO that all of these PowerPoint presentations will be up on the website now. They're already up there.
Yes, that one.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we say this is a social accountability system, of which the project that I'm supporting for Tanzania is actually adapting. And we say in order to have human rights realized in any particular society, these 5 stages are very important. So we have like 5 stages, of which I'll not just go through them. But planning and resource allocation is crucial. Any government, any state must have this in order to make sure that one day human rights are observed in their countries. The second one is expenditure management. The third is performance management. Fourth is public integrity. And the 5 is the oversight. So in this project that we are doing as Action Aid, in these 4 countries, we are in Tanzania, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia, is just to make sure that all the oversight bodies, especially the parliamentarians, know about this system. Because if we want to have effective utilization of public resource management, these are the issues that we want to see. So, what is the role of PBO? The role of PBO now is to help the members of parliament in these countries to make sure that they understand this cycle. You know, it's just a model that we use, and we have adopted it from PSAM in the Rhodes University. So we want them to understand, actually, when members of parliament, do they know these processes? And when they interrogate the budgets, do they know actually what is entails in each of the stages? So that is why in this project we'll be working closely with the parliamentary budget officers to make sure that they also know about that one. Now, to finish up, there are questions in each of those 5 stages that we have to ask when we are interrogating budgets. And I have been saying we are interrogating because it is the human right-based kind of intervention. So, question number 1, for example, for purpose 1, planning and resource allocation. People do ask themselves, do planning and budget processes ensures that equitable and informed choices are made? Do they justify these choices in relation to the people's priorities? That is question number 1. Number 2, do the budget and the plan in showing how policy, priorities, and strategies, plan, objectives will be resourced and achieved? Adopt a medium-term perspective. And number 3, does the process of budget and planning set strict and credible boundaries for collection and spending of public money to progressively realize the people's choices? So these are some of the questions in the process 1, of which now through the assistance and technical assistance from the Parliamentary Budget Office, we think members of parliament will be able So this is just the process 1. When you go to process 2 and 5, we have also kind of these things. So for us, actually, parliamentary budget offices are very, very crucial to make sure that they help these members of parliament so that the public funding or public resources can be achieved. So there are a lot of things, but due to the time, I think I will just end up there. But I'm looking forward, actually. I've seen people from Mozambique, I've seen people from Malawi, people from Zambia are there. So I think through this project, I know in one way or another, you'll have to meet my colleagues from those countries, of which actually together, we are thinking that to make sure for those countries who doesn't have these parliamentary budget offices, through this project, we'll make sure we contribute to the initiative. But for us, for Tanzania, we are there. But the question which comes is that I don't know in other countries, but in my country, there is a tendency where government establishes things or parliament establishes things because they have to have that what we call the compliance. So the question here is, do we start this PBO because of compliance, or they are really going to answer what actually people there need? Because like now for my country, we started in 2015, September, up to this moment, nothing significantly has been done. I don't know, but I had time to talk to the director of this PBO office in Tanzania. They haven't done so much. So the question is, do we start this because we want to have to tick that we have PBO offices? But actually, the role of the PBO is very significant. And I think from all these presentations that we have here, it is very important to understand. And it's not actually easy, like other people have said, but actually, at the end of the day, we want to see human rights are being realized in our countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Christina is actually working for the German development agency GIZ on its good financial governance program. She's been in the German parliament. She studied international public law in Cape Town at the University of the Western Cape, and I'll hand over to her. Thank you.
May I steal your microphone? Honorable members of parliament, ladies and gentlemen, I am trying to present a little the approach of my GIZ program to the questions of good financial governance and particularly legislative oversight, because this is the capacity in which I do work currently for the program. But looking into the theme of our session here, public finance positions, I wanted to lift our view and perhaps go beyond that what it sounds to be. Public finance seems to be a domestic governance matter, but actually let us try to also capture some regional trends and global commitments to understand better that public financing is definitely exposed to global complexity of our days. So how do I have to, the structure of my presentation I wanted to give you right from the start. So I want to start with some regional trends and global commitments, a special focus I will give to Agenda 2063, to then move on to the GFG priorities in the region and especially the legislative oversight. My final comment will be on the GIZ policy responses and how to achieve and support good financial governance. Let me start with a kind of broad question: will Africa keep rising? Generally speaking, one can say so far underlying drivers of medium-term growth remain in place in many African countries, such as strengthened institutions and policy implementation capacity. It has increased within the last decade. Improved business environment and favorable demographics. But beyond the country level, what is perhaps worth looking at on the global and regional level? Looking into the global dynamics of the last 10 years, we all know that we came from a finance crisis in 2008 that actually had a global dimension and painful impacts on many public finance systems in the world, or on public financing as such. It was, I think, first the industrialized countries that paid the bill of the speculations done, which led to that crisis. But now, in the aftermath of that crisis, I think it actually still impacts on all public finances, also of especially resource-rich African countries. One, for example, has to cope nowadays with a renewed decline in oil or in other commodity prices. An ongoing volatility in global financial markets is something that public finance systems have to deal with. And a further slowdown in the Chinese or European economy also, of course, affects African countries a lot, which are closely affiliated to the world market. Regionally, I think you have to also look into challenges resulting from the weakness in commodity exports. Then, last but not least, we have increasing global climate change, which hits, first and foremost, African countries along the equatorial regions with droughts or other natural disasters. And, of course, also an ongoing delay in moving ahead with policy adjustment and structural reforms will also not increase the resilience of public finance systems to actually global effects, and especially what was very prominently staged by the Mbeki report in the year 2015, the illicit financial flows. And security challenges are a special issue in the context of public financing. So is there hope, after all? And what can we actually do to meet these global economic problems? I think and I hope there was a bit of an answer, a response given to the global dimensions of of global world economy. And I want to remind all of us to the global year of development, the year 2015, when there was actually a strong statement given by international community holding 3 conferences. One was financing for development in Addis Ababa in July. The other one then was in New York, September, where the new Agenda 2013 with its 17 sustainability development goals was launched. And last not but least, after years and years of yearly international conferences on climate change, Paris was a great step ahead and achieved unseen commitment, which still is having effects up until today. But let me also highlight the special, the Agenda 2063 we are talking about today. Also on that agenda, I think the topic of good governance is literally high on the agenda. Yeah? It is an overarching theme throughout, and at the same time, it has a standalone goal in Goal 3. Goal 4 and 6 connect and mention good governance as key factor to peace and security here on the continent and to political participation. Just as Agenda 2063 has a standalone goal for good governance, it also is to be found in the Agenda 2030 as Goal 16. Good financial governance in both agendas actually is also very prominently mentioned. So domestic resource mobilization through independent and capacitated tax administration, reduction of illicit financial flows, effective oversight and accountability are actually a normative base now on which every governance system in the world should operate. The Agenda 2063 made it, of course, a particular call for African countries, but not to forget that Agenda 2030 is applicable to all countries in the world, and due to its universal character, I think we are all in the same boat. So, considering that there was that move, that commitment given by the international community to improve financial governance and to also capacitate countries to have their own domestic resource mobilization, let me try to link that to the priorities here in the African region. To deal with current challenges is, of course, now that what needs to be tackled. I've mentioned some like subdued global demand, low commodity prices, but also structural bottlenecks. Then also, I mean, linking again to the African agenda, revenue mobilization, public financial management, internal and external control, legislative oversight, are now actually the topics which should be focused on. Regional integration, when it comes to tax policy, supervision, PFM regulations, and a more tailored approach to countries in fragile situations. So looking into these priorities and coming from where I'm coming as a technical advisor for legislative oversight, I think I have to step back. Then let me quickly explain you the approach that our program is taking towards the priorities in this area and what leads us in our work. This graphic that you see there, it reminds me a little to what you just staged, because it is kind of, you know, also trying to give a holistic approach to changing public finance systems and increasing the efficiency and transparency and accountability of governance. And you called it a social accountability system. I think we even stepped one step further back. But what I try to point out is in the green section, you see we are not only talking about the technical dimension of public finance management, that goes without saying. And I think also in that area, the PBOs will be found. But we also talk about increasing a kind of normative dimension, which you mentioned with the human rights, but which we will find especially in each parliament, I think. I mean, that is the space where laws and norms are challenged and redefined and made. And of course, political economy dimension, which is the decision-making process in parliament, but also participation of civil society. Looking into this holistic approach to the topic of good financial governance, you can see, you know, that we do not stop there where technical assistance is needed, that we want to go beyond. And I think I'm working very much in that capacity as a technical advisor to legislative oversight. Therefore, please allow me to point out where I think one has to always put a special effort into. And I do speak with a special focus on African systems, but I must say I think it all applies also to every legislative oversight system in the world. I think lack of capacity of oversight committees or parliamentary oversight capacity is something which should be addressed. That goes almost without saying to me. But what I hear over and over again from the partner network I'm working with, which is a continental African network of public accounts committee, they are calling for financial expertise and support staff. And it is very core to them to actually be able to proceed audit reports in a timely manner. I hear my time is up. 3 more minutes, I'll be done. No. The lack of enforcement structures for oversight committees for effective action is also core to success in their mission, and interagency communication, as well as relevant information and laws to increase transparency. Limitations to oversight, last but not least, also come very often from a lack of political will to actually allow critical questions. And now that I have been working with parliamentarians here in Africa for the last 1.5 years, I have many times heard the question, how to make a difference? And actually, you know, many times I heard the parliamentarians call for action. And they said we have to move away from concern to action. And I think I want to actually encourage the decision makers to do so. I hope that parliamentary budget officers are actually support in that and will therefore increase the effectiveness. And Honorable Karim, I'm also very happy to hear that you have decided to move more into action than ever before. I read an article in the news 2 weeks ago where you said you're now vigorously fighting illicit financial flows.
I've been saying that since 1994, but never mind.
Yeah, I was hoping that there will be even more action now. And we will definitely support any of such action on a regional level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sorry, I hate being a policeman, but I think the idea is to encourage discussion. They said 10 minutes, not me, right? So you must quibble with them. All right, the next speaker, then if you kindly vacate your chairs, obviously you'll respond. The next speaker in this program is, of course, Siraj, who's Deputy Director of the PBO here, focusing on economic issues. And he's a well-known academic and social activist. And he'll get embarrassed if I say anything more, so I'll hand over to him.
Thank you very much, Chair. Sorry, I just need my... So, while we're getting the presentation up, I'll just introduce the topic. Fortunately, the previous speaker did mention illicit flows quite a few times. What I'll be focusing on is the issue of illicit flows and talking about it in the context of capital flight. And here we, with illicit flows, we're talking about basically, even though there's been quite a bit of deregulation of financial markets across Africa and South Africa, and also increasing allowances and ability to move money in and out of the country, we're still seeing high levels, and often, especially in areas like trade misinvoicing, growing levels of capital flight. So, and this is, I think, a very important issue for us to address. And as was said, that the chair of our finance committee has taken on this on the agenda, and we have had a few sessions with different agencies in South Africa to address this. So what I'm going to do today is just look at what some of the issues are, talk about Africa, and go specifically to some issues in South Africa as well. Thank you. So, starting off, why is capital flight a concern? They are both development and fiscal implications. The state provides important services and infrastructure for societal and economic development. The developmental impact of capital flight is that there's less money available for public investment, social services, and infrastructure. Capital flight and the illicit export and concealment of wealth abroad leads to a reduction in the tax base. The link between corruption and capital flight is well established in many countries. And I think we saw after the Arab Spring and even earlier in Africa that many deposed dictators had huge amounts of money in tax haven countries, offshore. But overall, this is a huge problem. And also, there's an interesting reference where an author has estimated that African countries could have increased the annual average rate of poverty reduction by between 1.9 and 2.5% per annum during the period 2000 to 2010 if flight capital had been invested. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong screen, sorry. Sorry. Now, in terms of development and the growth implications, capital flight reduces public and private domestic investment and economic growth. Indeed, capital flight may be an important reason for low growth on the African continent over an extended period. One of the authors in the Kumana 2014 says simulations, he's one of the authors who's actually done really good work in estimating capital flight from across Africa. He says simulations indicate that had African countries been able to retain flight capital invested domestically at a rate of return equivalent to historical records, they would have recorded a substantially higher growth rate. He estimates that, again, for that period, 2000 to 2010, that they could have recorded an additional growth rate of up to 3%. So this is across the continent. These numbers come from an author called James Henry. He's famous for writing a book called Blood Bankers, I think. But he's got a website called Global Haven Industry. And unlike macroeconomists like me who estimate capital flight using central bank and other macro data, he actually does investigative work like an investigative journalist and follows companies and trails of money. And what he's estimated actually is much higher than especially the macro work, which is we actually really careful, and we often deliberately underestimate the sizes of capital flight. In his work, I think we get a better estimation based on his work looking at specific multinational corporations, trailing the money, speaking to people across the world within revenue services, tax collection, etc. And just looking at the bottom line, for Africa, he basically calculates that over the period 1970 to 2014, that the cumulative capital flight to GDP ratio would be 24%. So basically, we're looking at almost a quarter of GDP over a prolonged period being unaccounted for and possibly illicitly moved out of African countries. This is from Ndukumana's work, and these again include that period, 1970 to 2010. The graph on the right basically looks at capital flight per year. Thanks. And the red line, and from what we see there is that compared to net transfers on debt, FDI, overseas development aid, remittances, that capital flight has almost every year been much higher. So what we're seeing is that Africa's actually become a net lender to the rest of the world if you take into account capital flight. Rather than the money moving into Africa, as everybody thinks should be happening, the money is actually moving out of Africa. If we look at his estimations, which include trade misinvoicing, which is and using the macro version, we see that the light blue line in the left chart shows that for the 37 African countries, we have a stock of capital flight, so basically adding it up to almost 1.7 trillion over that period. And if we don't add interest rates, for instance, to that, and you use the real number for 2010, it reduces to 1.3 trillion. So we see that the scales are fairly staggering. And if we think about the impact not only on countries' developments, but on the fiscus and revenue collection, this is a huge problem. Now, I did a quick estimation of capital flight on South African public finance position, and I used estimations of capital flight, which also uses the macro estimation. This is from a group called Global Financial Integrity, who works closely with governments, Tax Justice Network, and other global organizations. And just to get to the bottom line, if you look at, let's see if we, this number here, minus 0.2%. What I'm saying is that if there was if we recalculated the South African deficit after saying that we'd have an effective tax rate of 30%, which seems fairly common in the literature to use that kind of number on flows. If we had a 30% collection on illicit flows, the average annual deficit in South Africa from 2004 to 2013 would be minus 0.2%, not at the levels we have now. So basically close to being a balanced budget, so basically almost no primary deficit. Now, when we look at economic explanations of capital flight, the mainstream economics views coming out of, especially from the 80s, 70s and 80s, and which were incorporated into sort of, I think, the older versions of what good governance is, made an argument that, you know, for people who had wealth in countries where there was capital flight, there was an incentive for them to move their money out of the countries because they felt insecure because of political instability, they felt insecure because of macroeconomic instability, and they were worried about that there wasn't good governance in place in terms of property rights, or that the state would basically take things from them, and their property rights were unsure. What we're seeing today is that those kind of explanations of capital flight don't hold as much ground, and also empirically they seem less grounded. And what we're seeing today, at least since the 2000, is that much more macro stability in Africa, no hyperinflation. In this crazy global financial system, we can talk about more stable exchange rates, whatever that means, given how volatile they are, even in developed countries. But we're seeing that kind of stability. We also see higher growth, and therefore higher returns in Africa. And in the last few years, at least since the global financial crisis, when we had very low interest rates in the developed countries, the rates of return in Africa were much higher. So it makes us rethink what were the causes of capital flight. And I think the kind of broad macro environment, good governance, the older types explanations, and we actually see, and the last speaker mentioned it, that we are actually updating what we mean when we talk about good governance. And good governance now also includes trying to deal with illicit flows. But we're not seeing that happening, I think, fairly effectively. Now, from the literature and the data that's being collected, I think a lot is about wealthy, private, and also public members of the elite who hold wealth wanting to hide and avoid scrutiny of their wealth. Boyce and Kumana, in a 2012 book called Africa's Odious Debt, used the term... Okay. I used up 10 already. Okay.
No, that's what the iPhone.
Oh, sorry, okay. so can I have 2 more minutes?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. They talk about a secrecy premium that people, perpetrators of capital flight, link to them, where they're willing to accept a much lower rate of return so that they can actually secretly hold their wealth abroad. And large amounts of illicit flows of former leaders were uncovered in safe haven country banks. Levels of capital flight, large levels for tax avoidance, capital flight supported by financial and trade regulation without adequate monitoring and other institutional oversight. And this is not only in Africa, this is across Asia and Latin America, and even in some European countries. A preponderance of extractive industries and the increasing commodity prices seems to be an important factor, and this is particularly true in Africa and Latin America. Now, not only are there sort of attractive factors, but pull factors. And these are linked to how moving and concealing private wealth around the world is easier. Bank secrecy in an era of increased financial deregulation and integration and the growth of offshore finance. And here, when we talk about offshore financial centers, we're not only talking about tropical islands. We actually see some of the most secretive jurisdictions in developed countries, the US, UK, Germany, Switzerland, etc. And one author, Gray, and his co-authors found that out of most of the stolen funds recovered so far in the Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative, most was actually from the major developed countries. So I'm rushing now, so I won't go into trade misinvoicing too much, but to say that trade misinvoicing has become a growing and a more important factor, and this is linked to multinational corporations and their control over global value chains. And this is very true, especially in the extractive industries, where we see a lot of capital flight from Africa coming from oil and countries like South Africa and platinum, silver, etc. So I did include some pictures if you're going to look at it later. Sorry, let me move on. I'm going to stop now, Chair. So basically, for South Africa, I've got trade invoicing numbers for silver and platinum. This is not, here we go. And also for gold, and showing that these are actually fairly high levels, which to some extent explains why South Africa didn't benefit from the large increase in minerals commodities prices in the 2000s. Okay, we also see that there are other examples in Africa, and one interesting one is Zambia. I won't talk about Nigeria now, where Zambia's national data shows that Switzerland is the top buyer of copper, 51% of its total, but Swiss trade data actually show no imports from Zambia, and this shows the importance of multinational corporations, because basically a lot of the extractive industries are based in those countries. I apologize, Chair. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's running to 14 minutes, but thanks for that. It's a terribly important topic, and I'm really sorry that we had to cut you short, but Neil is the same person he was when you met him 2 hours ago. He's not a politician, so nothing much has changed, right, in the last 2 hours. So there's no need to introduce him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So without synchronizing our presentations, my presentation follows on quite nicely from the previous presentation in the sense that I am obsessed with if this money that illicitly flows out of Africa is returned back to Africa, how capable are our systems to allocate that money in a way that does achieve allocative efficiency, that does ensure that we increase our expenditure and investment that we're going to be making in health or in education. Because if the systems are that weak and that weakness allowed for the funds to be taken out illicitly, we could very easily just see a recycling of the resources going back into some of those havens. I only have 5 slides, and I want to use my time to provide you with an overview of the state of public finances in Africa. And I suppose I'm not going to be able to do justice to it because they are 54 African countries, and each one of those countries are at different stages in terms of the kind of reforms that they've introduced to improve on public finance management. Okay, so this is my previous presentation, so let me just go right through it. I like to start a graphic which shows the previous finance minister, because the current one is a very handsome person. So this is a perennial problem that is faced by all African countries, if not all countries in the world, unless you're Norway, and that is that the basket of priorities are always going to be much bigger than what the budget can afford. And in that basket, you have the things that you have to do as recurrent expenditure. And from time to time, there are other expenditures that you need to meet that fills up the budget. The bailout of SOEs, increase in social grants, new spending priorities that need to be provided for. But in reality, what all our countries here face is that we do have a scarcity of resources, and we have to figure out ways in which we decide which are the most important things from that basket of priorities that we are going to squeeze into what is represented here as a test tube. The thing about a test tube is that it has a measure on it, and you cannot get more into it than it can hold. And that's essentially what a budget is. And a lot of the reforms that have been introduced are essentially to improve on the decisions that we are taking in order to ensure that the right things go into that test tube, whether it be improvements to the budget process, the introduction of medium-term budgeting, etc. So across Africa, there's definitely not been a shortage of attempts to improve on planning, improve on budgeting, and improvements in expenditure management. And unfortunately, and I think we need to be frank about this, a lot of the reforms have been introduced, and they've been introduced and have made things look different, but they've not necessarily functioned differently. So if we think of budget formulation, and that is where the budget is being formulated, there's been several reforms. Medium-term expenditure frameworks are very popular, and it is a reform that is meant to push out the horizon in terms of planning and also the estimates of what expenditure will be over that longer term horizon. And the same year applies to program-based budgeting, where countries would say, yes, we do have medium-term expenditure frameworks, but in actual fact, that is not the budget. That is just a plan, or it is a pre-budget statement that is tabled, but it is not a reflection of what actual expenditure will be over the three-year period. So quite different to what we have in South Africa, where the MTF is the budget, right? Or at least the first year of the MTF is the budget that gets appropriated for many countries, and MTF is merely a plan that doesn't necessarily have to align to the budget. Some of the other reforms, fiscal rules, lots of improvements to the budget process, and then the one that is probably the most popular has been program and performance-based budgeting. An interesting point here is that one of the, I suppose one can call him the father of program-based budgeting. It's a professor that is, I think, still at Maryland University, Alan Schick. He was commenting on this reform about 30 years after the reform had first been introduced in the US. And he was saying the problem with program-based budgeting he now recognizes is that we tried to use the budget to improve performance, and what we neglected was the program manager, the person that sits in education, the person that sits in health, in order to, how do we measure that person's performance if that person is responsible for the program? Whereas the focus and the investment that we made was in the way that we were formulating a budget to represent various programs within ministries of finance. So some rethinking on this reform. In budget approval, I think, this is where we're most familiar, and what we were talking about in the earlier session. In the budget approval, we've also seen across Africa several reforms being introduced, especially with the establishment of parliamentary budget offices, and also the amendment powers that many parliaments always had, but there have been always some delays in putting in place the procedures on how those amendments were to be undertaken. On budget execution, the introduction of single treasury accounts, which is essentially about cash management and how governments improve the management of their cash on a daily basis. Sometimes we don't always think that a government needs to know exactly what it has on a daily basis that it is able to spend, and where that money is located. Is it with a central bank? Is it with a commercial bank? Or is it being collected on a daily basis by the revenue authorities? And knowing what those amounts are, because if you don't know, you may be tempted to go out and borrow for the gap between what it is that you believe you have and what it is that you need to spend on a daily basis. Integrated financial management systems, a very popular reform in South Africa at the moment, but certainly one that is being implemented across Africa. Very expensive reform, a reform that has given rise to a lot of what we all call wasteful and fruitless expenditure, where systems, off-the-shelf systems have been introduced. They've not satisfied the purpose that they were meant to. New systems were then later on introduced, the one that we know about that has caused quite a lot of problems has been the IFMIS in Malawi, the scandal called Cashgate, where the IFMIS system was in fact used to perpetuate the corruption that was taking place. Procurement reforms, internal audit reforms, and then on budget evaluation, also several reforms there. The impact of these reforms it's quite interesting in that many of them, as I keep on emphasizing, has changed the form of many systems. So now we don't do line item budgeting, we do program-based budgeting, but it's really just in form, and it hasn't necessarily had an impact in making the system more functional. in recent work that we are currently doing with teams in ministries of finance in several African countries, we have come across some very, very basic challenges with the way that public finances are managed. What I suppose we could call the bread and butter challenges of managing public finances. And I'm not going to mention the countries here because it's an ongoing process, and they haven't given me permission to disclose who they are. But I think these are illustrative. In a country that we're working with at the moment, there are high violence. Initially, we thought it was a misallocation of the budget, but it's actually because of the violence that are taking place that the budget that is spent is not the budget that was appropriated by Parliament. So in that country, you can via up to 75% of a budget line. So if you think of your role as Parliament, you've appropriated amount, you've appropriated an allocation, whether it is to a line or to a ministry or to a program. But when the funds get spent, there's a lot of shifting. In some cases, an entire budget line gets shifted, and the budget that is spent looks very different to the budget that is appropriated, right? So we're coming across this in not only the country we're working with, but certainly in several others. Cash management capability gaps, and this is where there's really no strong sense of what is available for expenditure on a daily basis, and if that is the case, you end up borrowing unnecessarily, and through that increase your debt service costs. Public debt management capabilities, a significant problem. Weak appraisal of infrastructure investment, deficiencies in service delivery, and some worrying trends in debt to GDP ratios. There was some comments made earlier about the IMF and taking the IMF with a big bag of salt. Well, many of these problems, if we don't address these problems, often we don't have the choice in whether the IMF needs to be invited to intervene or not. Many of these problems, if left unaddressed, will result in the IMF having to intervene, whether that is for a balance of payment support or to set some conditions related to that balance of payment supports that is going to put a squeeze on many of those things. So what should a functional PFM system look like? I am out of time. These are not the things that, unfortunately, these are not the things that get measured by many standard accountability frameworks. It's not what PIFA measures, and it's not what some of the transparency indexes measure, but it's what a group of us that authored a paper called This is PFM propose as important measures for a functional PFM system, and it relates to prudent fiscal decisions, credible budgets, reliable and efficient resource flows and transactions, and institutional capability. It's the kind of things where you say that if you have a functional PFM system, you must be able to pay contractors on time. You must be able to pay salaries on time. You must make sure that you get cash to spending agencies on time, as agreed and in agreed amounts. So it's the kind of things that speak to what is it that needs to happen at expenditure side that supports service delivery in a way that is sustainable. Thank you very much.
As I understand it, we have an hour and 15 minutes for the session, right? Is that correct? So we have up till 3:35. We started at 2:20. Is that correct? Fine. So we've got, unfortunately, less than 20 minutes. Let's see how many hands. I'll forego my comments. They're inane in any case. It's more important to hear. Yeah, that's one. Who else wants to speak? Two. Who else? 3. 4. Remember, they have to reply. So if you could kindly use up to 2 minutes. It's not my doing. It's the time system. I didn't create it. It's 3:35, is that right? So we have to stop. I think people are going for public tour or something, is that right? 6, is it 6, right? Okay, Comrade Sila Setole Shope. Fine. So we start. You know your numbers, right? And we all know you by now. Unless you haven't spoken, we know who you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Vusi from the Budget Office in the National Treasury. I'll try to be very quick. The work you do, Mr. Mkwantwa, I think it's a very important work that it introduces a very important element that it's often overlooked, if not completely ignored in the entire budgeting framework. That notwithstanding, we all know that budgeting, it's a very disciplined process. By that I mean that we can spend, as Mr. Cole has indicated, we can spend as much as we can collect. So I'm interested to find out from the work you've done and collaborations we've done with the PBOs in different countries, how have you been able to balance the variety of human rights and the limitedness of the budget? Put differently, how do you prioritize the human rights within the scarcity of resources that countries have? Thank you.
Next person, please. The South Africans here are fighting about how much they exceeded the time. Can I thank the non-South Africans? You were great. Right, let's get back to, are you done? Number 2, please.
Mine, I'll just make a remark that I want us to think about. It's not a question, but it's linked to his. In the morning, we had a lady, the madam who is seated there, she was talking of governments wanting to fulfill the requirements of the electorate, and then transparency institutions blocking them. But the issue is, when you're making a budget like he says, you are trying to answer the needs of the electorate. So within that single financial year, which other urgent needs come up that justify you to go outside the budget? So there are catchwords that wrong systems use to kind of protect illicit flows and sustainable financial governance systems, claiming you are interfering with our sovereignty, you are interfering with our answering to the electorate, when actually it's a cover-up to engage in wrong issues.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, Chair. 2 things. The first one is it's a pity that the presentation that was done by, I think, Siraj Mohammed, I plea for one way or another that this information be made available. I mean, if there's any 5 minutes that you can, as difficult as it might be, because I think that was quite important to have given far more exposure to the report that he has done. So my plea would be, I'm sure today is maybe difficult, but if there's anything tomorrow to come back with that again, then it really would be helpful. The second thing that I want to say is all the other presentations that has been made. So if you look, take that against the formulation and the rollout of these budget offices everywhere, would you be able to say with clear conviction that all these budget officers have been able to reach the level of providing that kind of information to legislatures already? Because at the end of the day, if you say there's capital flight, surely the legislature has to be blamed. If you say that all those things in the last presentation that you showed, surely it comes back to the legislature also to say, where were you at with that list of or the trends at least that you are seeing? And then maybe you would want to make some suggestions to ensure that you don't locate these only within maybe the finance committees also, but the legislature, and in South Africa's case, legislatures, meaning right into the provinces also, and local government. Thank you.
Please, number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Innocence Fainda. I'm country representative of Westminster Foundation for Democracy in Mozambique. Mr. Kwata and Mrs. Muller, they highlighted very well the role of developing partners on supporting the parliaments. And the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, in partnership with the UNICEF we are helping the Parliament of Mozambique to establish their PBO. And one of the challenge that we have is the organization within the Parliament itself, in terms of what exactly they do need in terms of to have this kind of support. And the partners must be aware of that and to have a good read on what exactly are the needs. I'm here with Dr. Atanasio, who is head of the Technical Cabinet. We are established the PBO within the structure of the Parliament because we found very hard to bring or to propose something new on the parliamentary structure. And then within the structure of the Parliament, we find that there is a possibility to establish this PBO on the Technical Cabinet. And Mr. Mkwata, I heard that the Action Aid is trying to support the establishment of PBO in Parliament of Mozambique, so we are open to discuss and to see how can we coordinate to support this Parliament. Thank you.
5. Where's number 5? Oh, number 5. Are you number 5, sir? Number 6, then.
Thank you, Chair. To Action 8, I was really impressed by your approach, but I'm just worried that you mentioned everybody else except for your adopted child, South Africa. What happened to our friendship? Can you do something to better that relationship? The other one is PBO. I think this is a very important research that you have done that I think should be known not only by the finance and appropriation committees, but everything should be done to make sure that all the committees of Parliament should be addressed on this research, so we can take the discussion from there.
Okay, thank you. Just to point out, I asked Professor Jahed whether we could have an extended time. He says no. So if you're complaining, it's not to me, right? Because I think we're 35 minutes behind schedule. Very quickly, Connie, Siraj's thing is on the website, okay? His input.
It will be put up.
Yeah, it's put up on the website today. And secondly, a lot of the issues we've been saying have been covered. We can give you a lot of stuff by the Finance, Trade and Industry, and Minerals Committee. And just to say, by the way, it's not about me. I noticed my friend from Germany. It's the committee, and it's 3 committees. And we meet again on the 30th of August. Our main point is that hundreds of cases, if not thousands, have been referred to the authorities by the Financial Intelligence Center, the South African Revenue Service, et cetera, Reserve Bank. Nothing happens. So our main focus on the 30th of August is we want to see people inside the criminal justice system. We want to see them in jail. You see, we can discuss with due respect to you, right? You guys helped us. The PBO helped us a lot. But there's very little that he's saying that's relevant to us, Connie. We want action now. The strategies, the theories, the perspectives, fine. We can continue, this is useful. But really, what we want to see, the most useful thing, Connie, is to see about 15 people in jail, right, within the next 6 months. That's what we want. Right, so that's the focus from our side for what it's worth. Now, the other quick thing I want to raise, right, just some quick things because we're running out of time. One is, you see we have Agenda 2063. Other countries, respective countries, not least our own, country development plans, like speaking to that Agenda 2063, not clear to me. Secondly, it just strikes me listening to Neil that multi-year planning becomes ever more crucial if you're talking of Agendas 2063 and so on. Thirdly, there's no mention of civil society. Fortunately, this illicit financial flows, it's horrific. Horrific. Even if half of that is accurate, and I think actually it's worse than he's making out here, from the little that I know, we have to act on this thing. So I'll hand over then to, look, Professor Dumasani, how are these people going to reply in 7 minutes? And I didn't use my 10 minutes overview. So can we extend it by 5 minutes at least? I'm going to be very harsh on the two South Africans, in fairness. So they'll have 1.5 minutes. The others will have 2.5 minutes, because we have to round up and people have to, there's another program that is already beginning to unfold, right? So there it is. Let's start with Sam Willie. You got 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Because of my size, I think I should stand. Anyway, thank you, Vuse, if I quoted well your name. Of course, we have the challenge. Always resources are not enough. And that is why through our public accountability system, we say, and the government, many government, I think if you know, we call the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. It says that signatories agreed that they will make sure they provide these human rights basing on the available resources. So the challenge here is many politicians want to do everything, and that is the challenge. So to prioritize what to do is actually what we are emphasizing in this system. And if you go, because it is in itself, it's a cause that people go and you have to go and read about it. But we say after human rights, you know, people, when they have their needs, they say that we have this system that the government is to collect what people want. Now, when you have them, everything will be said. Now comes the government to prioritize. What are the issues? What are the pertinent issues that they need to tackle to these people? So from there now, you are looking on your resource envelope. How much is there? So, and when we are going to assess the accountability, we are not going to say why you didn't do everything. But what we say is like, if you decided that in these 3 years, you are going to spend money for education, is that what we want? To see that education improving. There is no way that you can do everything. So that is a major challenge, that whenever you go, in each financial year, you find the government committing to do everything. We'll do this in education, this in health, this in agriculture, this in whatever. But the resource is not there. So the challenge here is on how to prioritize. And this actually is a systemic problem. If you plan bad, obviously everything will go bad. So for us, what we say is true. We know that the resources are very limited, but what we say for the government to make sure that they plan that available resources to a specific sector. So they should be very focused to say, maybe we now for these 3 years, we are going for health. The coming 3 years, we are going for agriculture, to make sure that they cover. But they cannot actually, and it's not possible to have everything covered within that financial year. So that is very, very important. But also on
you used up 3 minutes. If you could just round up in 15 seconds.
Okay.
Some of these issues you can pick up later. Is that right?
Thank you. What I say, I agree with my friend in Mozambique, that when we do this to establish this parliamentary budget office, of course, we are looking on that, what we said, on the aspect of human rights. So we go to the government to tell it is important for PBO to be there, and they have to make sure that it is there to help the parliamentarians on how to analyze budgets as far as public resource management is concerned.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Muller-Kuckelberg, thank you.
Just a short comment, because I couldn't see that any question was directly addressed to me. I liked very much what you just said, you know, that the PBO is probably also making his information available for all committees in Parliament. because I think indeed to capacitate the decision makers will not necessarily always lead to immediate action, but in the long run it actually gives space for that. And I think that is also increased by having a PBO network and working with networks in the GIZ program. I also wanted to congratulate you one more to this approach. Thanks.
All right, don't let the country down, eh? 1.5 minutes.
Okay, I think the problem is, in reference to what the chair said about getting people in jail, is not only South Africa, but across the world, the level of uncoordination of this issue. I mean, we saw it in one of the joint hearings that was chaired by the chair here. I mean, each organization came, they were doing their own thing, and nobody had seemed to have spoken to each other. And we had National Treasury coming and saying, well, we've got all these questions, when after like 15 years we'd expect answers. So I think that's really important. And within the literature, and coming out of civil society organizations working with governments, we're actually seeing abilities to deal with this in terms of tracking, in terms of watching borders, in terms of watching revenue services, etc. And hopefully we can bring that into the process once the coordination discussion starts. The second thing is that this isn't because of misallocation across government, and the fault isn't only the legislature. The fault lies across both the private and the public sector. The fault also lies with our approach to financial deregulation, which was something that started in the 80s through to the 90s, and we actually didn't adequately regulate, and we're still not adequately regulating. And the South African Reserve Bank actually got rid of some of its capacity to monitor exchange controls and capital movements, and that was reset up within the Financial Intelligence Center. And so we actually, to some extent, tied one hand behind our back. Is that 1.5 minutes? I'll stop there. Thank you.
100%.
Just a quick point. And those that are the recipients of illicit financial flows, whether it is those that are in the countries where these funds are flowing to, and those from which the jurisdictions from which these funds are flowing, are always going to be one step ahead of governments. And I think it's going to be about how do we prevent that one step from being 2 and 3 and 4 steps. So the only thing that I think the focus needs to be on now, because we know the numbers, we know how it's happening, we know the perpetrators in many cases, is going to be what kind of capabilities do we need to put in place in our tax administration, in our ministries of finance, in our auditing functions, in order to ensure that as these schemes get more sophisticated, that we are able to keep up. You know, in theory, they say an effective state is a state that has the monopoly on violence, monopoly over violence. Maybe we need states that need to have the monopoly on illicit financial flows, so that we ensure that we have the capability to stop, to trace, and to return. Thanks.
Can I just say very quickly, in the flippant, quick way I said it, unless I misunderstood, the sort of work that Siraj is doing is very valuable. Please. And that one I was going to take to the 3 committees anyway. It's not that we're saying that, but more important right now, because we've had, for our committees, our 3 committees, we bring 8 committees together once a year, we've had like about 5, 6 major inputs, right, from experts from all over, including starting with Dumisani here, right, who first did the slide thing, which helped us, right? The thing, though, is we feel as MPs, we are not technocrats, right? So we've got enough of an understanding to know this is an obscene activity. And it's being conducted by the rich largely, obviously. It's monopoly capital in large. So, and the mining sector in particular, as you've directed our attention to it. So what we are saying is, on the 30th, for example, there may be some lessons here for other parliaments. We bring all the committees together. Siraj is right. At the last meeting, we were shocked, actually, at the lack of coordination. We've asked the minister once again last week in a different context when the Reserve Bank was here. 41 cases in the last 3 years, not a single conviction for this. The one conviction was for bribery. So we have now asked the minister, and I've spoken to him on Friday last, we want an interministerial committee, an interdepartmental structure. On the 30th, we are calling mainly the Hawks here and the SAPS, special divisions, to ask what are you doing about these cases. But it's a long haul, but I really think this is a crucial thing that all PBOs if I may say so, Mohammed, should get involved in some form or another. Apart from that, I have very little more to say of value. Of course, I could speak endlessly, but not much of value. What I do want to say, however, and I feel I should, I think I speak on behalf of Yvonne Pinky Posa and others who were here earlier, that, last year we had 7 countries present. Now it's jumped to 17. And really, the range of people here and the quality of the discussion, I came late for the reasons I explained, I think is a tremendous credit to all of us, but from the South African side, in particular, to the team, Professor Jahed, to Masani Yanchis and others. I don't know who the team exactly was, but it's the whole team. May we congratulate you. It's wonderful what you have done. Thank you very much for that. And thank you all for your patience, especially with the chairs. Can I hand over to Mohammed? You're going to explain what happens now, right? Oh, to Masani. Oh, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members and colleagues. I think what we have, we're quite behind schedule. We had a coffee break. We're supposed to have a coffee break together with a tour. So we'll have a coffee break, Chair. I think on the other area, there's a coffee together with some dessert. And then we'll have a public tour, a tour to the art gallery. But I think maybe we might cut it short. We should be back by 4 to continue the last session. So make it 4:15. We should be back by 4:15. So there's a coffee, and then there's a public tour to the art gallery, and we should be back by 4:15 latest. Thank you.
Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, shall we settle down so that we can start with the very, very last session of the day? Okay, as we reconvene, I would like to also acknowledge the presence of the former Speaker of Parliament, presiding officers, honorable members, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. After the health walk, can imagine that you'll be so alert on this very, very last session. And after this, it will just be dinner. So, welcome to this session. My name is Yvonne Posa. I am the chairperson of the Standing Committee on Appropriations. I will be chairing this session. Now, the plenary session topic for this afternoon is role of PBO in the budget cycle and fiscal oversight. The expectation in this session is that various PBOs would share their specific role as far as their country budget cycle is concerned. In particular, at what point in the cycle do PBOs provide their analysis to their parliaments? However, the session further provides opportunity for other stakeholders within the budget cycle to also share their experiences. Now, we have 3 speakers that will be sharing information with us this afternoon. And they are appearing on your programs. I would like to then call the first speaker, which is Mr. M. Tusubira from Uganda. He's the PBO in Uganda. I just want to check if I cannot fit in the second speaker to come and sit also this side, and then the third one who can just occupy a seat just here nearby. The second one is Zambia PBO, Mr. M. Kateshi. Welcome, sir. And then Nigeria NABRO, Mr. Aminu Abdullahi. Sorry if I have not pronounced your name correctly. You can come and sit here, just here, yeah, you can come and sit here nearby. Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, I will now allow the speaker to talk to us, but before that, I would like to introduce him to you. Mr. Tusubira is the Acting Director, Parliamentary Budget Office, Uganda. He joined PBO as a senior economist soon after the Budget Act 2001 was signed into law. In July 2001, despite the numerous administrative commencement challenges, he chose to stay and serve Parliament, rising through ranks to the post of an assistant director. Before he joined Parliament, he was an assistant lecturer at Makerere University, Kampala. So you must listen carefully here. We have a lecturer in the house. Teaching computer skills for economists. His background training is in statistics and applied economics. He underwent further training in economic policy and planning, and later developed a strong interest in advanced econometrics. He has a strong affection for developing and utilizing economic modeling and is a member of the country's modeling team for the Uganda Integrated Macroeconomic Model. At the PBO, he was entrusted with fiscal analysis for over a decade
and now handles economic analysis. Specifically, he serves the National Economy Committee and the Budget Committee. By analyzing government's economic and budget proposals, ensuring that all the provisions of budget laws are complied with. Currently, as an administrator, he focuses on building a stronger team of staff members and a more effective PBO, which will eventually ensure effective participation, transparency, openness, and accountability of public resources, policies, and legislation. I now present you Mr. Tusubira. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for this session. And honorable members, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for us as PBO Uganda to participate in this second conference of the African Network for PBOs. And would like to congratulate PBO South Africa for this successful organization of the conference. As you have already heard, PBO in Uganda was started in 2001 when the Budget Act was passed, which was an initiative of the backbench members, but was passed amidst objection of the executive. That's why PBOs still require support for sustainability from the members and the speakers of parliament for their survival. Now, the Budget Office in Uganda was created to create capacity, technical capacity within Parliament for the interpretation of national budget and economic data, and provide Parliament with objective, timely, and independent analysis, which was required at that time for national economic and budgetary scrutiny and decisions. We continue to say that PBOs serve as the eyes and the ears of Parliament. Without eyes, without ears, probably cannot move. But with those two, you're able to make meaningful decisions and get alternative paths. Now, the PBO in Uganda has supported Parliament through the budget cycle. The budget cycle in Uganda is a highly involving one. It starts in July, ends in June, and Parliament is an active participant. So as Parliament is active, PBO is on demand and continuously and proactively provides technical support and advice and information to members of Parliament. Before 2001, allow me to say that the Parliament lacked information, independent assurance, and interpretation of the official position of government. And for that matter, Parliament was a rubber stamp. The information that was requested and submitted to Parliament was not only adequate from the executive, but was also a mystery. So it was hard for Parliament to even do the budget oversight during the implementation. Now, how does Parliament, PBO support Parliament? In the cycle, as we know, we have 4 basic stages, but at all stages, PBO is present. In the formulation stage, in the approval, in the implementation, and in the audit, PBO's services are required. Now, we deploy a staff from PBO to all committees, standing, sectoral committees, ad hoc committees, and an officer from Budget Office is part of the secretariat, committee secretariat, but with specific roles to advise on the budget and the economy. The other members of the Secretariat include legal officers, researchers, the clerk, and sometimes from the Office of Official Reporting. We also serve the committees by inducting the members of parliament, especially when there's a new parliament, taking them to appreciate and understand the budget process, the budget law, and their role in ensuring budget openness, transparency, and accountability. We provide a budget manual to members of parliament. This is a simple, practical toolkit for some of the scrutiny requirements that they need to do. We provide them with research services in case they need in budget and economic issues. Now to the stages. In the first stage of formulation, what's the role of PBO? According to our PFMA, Public Finance and Management Act, government is supposed to submit a budget framework paper to Parliament in December. This is a medium term for 3 years ahead. And this is required to be approved by Parliament each year. Now, the role of PBO at this stage is to ensure or to see whether there is a linkage between what is submitted with the National Development Plan, with the sectoral investment plans, with the medium-term expenditure framework, and also to examine the macroeconomic assumptions which are driving the framework, to examine the certificates of gender and equity before this BFP or budget framework paper is approved by Parliament. Parliament has 1 month to scrutinize this document, so by end of January, this document is approved. Now, when it comes to approval stage of the budget, in April, the executive submits an annual plan, which is called the proposed annual plan before it is approved. And so PBO is called upon to ensure that there is consistency between what they already approved in January with what they have submitted now. Again, to review the certificate of compliance to the National Development Plan, certificate of gender and equity, to see whether the budget is comprehensive, to examine again the macroeconomic assumptions, fiscal framework, expenditure and tax measures, fiscal deficit, financing sources of this deficit, and the implications of all this to the welfare of the society. We have also the ministerial policy statements which are supposed to be approved from ministries, and the role of Parliament, PBO, is to ensure that the recommendations of Parliament, previous recommendations, were implemented, to establish whether sectoral plans and programs are meeting the objective goals, development goals, to examine the work plans, recruitment plans for the subsequent years, and also to examine whether outputs and outcomes are addressing the development challenges. Still in the approval stage, we look at the tax bills. There are amendments to indicate whether there are social costs and or benefits and long-term impacts of such taxes on the growth and employment, on prices, and also the macroeconomic aspects. We also have loans, government loans which are submitted for approval to Parliament. Now, PBO is assigned to review the requests, disclose the short-term and long-term implications of such loans to the current and the future generations. We look at the funding modalities and also aspects of impacts of such requests on the running and the future budgets. When it comes to implementation, we have, and just picking a few, we are required to submit periodic reports, economic and budget reports to committees on quarterly, so that there's a continuous monitoring and assessment of the economy. PBOs also look at the supplementary budget estimates submitted by the government to ensure that they are complying with the regulations and the laws. And still in the implementation, much of the work of Parliament, especially on the committee level, is conducted through field work. So PBO is assigned to draft terms of reference for committees for gathering and assessing performance of government projects. Under audit, PBO is called upon to ensure accuracy and consistency, whether the appropriated budget numbers were reflected in the financial statements of ministries. We also look at value for money reports, audit reports, to assess whether there's proper financial use, whether the objectives for allocations were attained. Under audit also, we look at public-private partnership frameworks. We evaluate these frameworks to ascertain whether there are contingent liabilities and associated risks to the economy. Briefly, that's what we do through the cycle. We want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Tusubira, for the insightful presentation. I will now call upon the second speaker on the list. That is Mr. M. Gateshi, Zambia PBO. I'd like to introduce him as follows. Mr. Misael Fitzgerald Gateshi has 18 years experience working with parliamentary committees in the National Assembly of Zambia. With respect to public financial management oversight, he has worked with the Public Accounts Committee, Committee on National Economy, Trade and Labor Matters, and Budget Committee since 2014. He has been working in the Interim Parliamentary Budget Office, which was granted department status on the 1st of August 2017. He was subsequently appointed Acting Deputy Principal Clerk, Parliamentary Budget Office, effective the same day. He holds a bachelor's degree in demography and economics from the University of Zambia and a master's degree in management, public and development from the University of Witwatersrand. He has also undergone specialized training in budgeting at Rhodes University, Duke University, and Center for Parliamentary Studies and Training of the Kenyan Parliament. He is also a CIMA management accounting technician. I present to you Mr. Gateshi. Over to you, sir.
Good evening to you all. May I join previous speakers who in welcoming the Honorable former Speaker of the National Assembly of South Africa, the Parliament of South Africa, Honorable Sisulu, Honorable members of Parliament here present, and all invited distinguished delegates. May I simply say, ladies and gentlemen. In my short discussion and sharing this early evening, I will follow more or less the same approach that Mr. Good has followed, Mr. Bisisa, in that I'll follow the 4 stages of the parliamentary budget cycle in order to explain some of the work that we're doing as PBO in Zambia. As was mentioned early in the during the day. The role of the PBO in the budget cycle and in fiscal oversight in general, or public financial management in general, is inextricably linked to the budget oversight function that Parliament has. They are created to serve the legislature, so the nature and the legal mandate that the Parliament has in budget oversight, to a great extent, has an influence in some of the functions that the PBO does perform. Specifically, in our case, we had a recent amendment to our constitution, which enhanced the oversight function of Parliament over the budget. And in particular, it is provided that the National Assembly shall oversee the performance of the executive by ensuring equity in the distribution of national resources amongst the people of Zambia, appropriating funds for expenditure by state organs, state institutions, provincial administration, local authorities and other bodies, scrutinizing public expenditure, including defense, constitutional and special expenditure, and approving public debt before it is contracted. The Constitution further goes to specify principles that the executive is supposed to follow in public financial management. Specifically, it specifies that there should be transparency and accountability in the development or formulation of macroeconomic frameworks, socio-economic plans and the budget, and the promotion of a public finance system that ensures that the burden of the taxation is shared fairly, revenue raised naturally is shared equitably among the different levels of government, and expenditure promotes the equitable development of the country. So, and also ensuring that there's sustainability in public borrowing to ensure intergenerational equity, and also the prudent and responsible use of public resources. So these also, in a way, determine the type of analysis that the budget, the Parliamentary Budget Office conducts, based on the principles that are specified in the legal framework, as well as the oversight function, the mandate that is given by the Constitution to do so. So, at the formulation stage, our current budgeting system, despite being despite being undergoing reform, it's a little bit weak in terms of legislative oversight. We are not yet at that stage, unlike our colleagues like Uganda has mentioned, Kenya, where, and I think including South Africa, where we have a mid-term policy statement that is presented to Parliament for approval before the main budget is presented by the Minister of Finance. So we indeed do prepare a medium-term expenditure framework, but it's still not a legal requirement that it should be submitted to the legislature for approval. So we still have that gray area, and we have the budgeting and planning legislation which is being formulated, and one of the areas that needs to be addressed is specifically that requirement that will compel the executive to present the medium-term policy statement before the main estimates are presented by the minister. So we see a weakness at the formulation stage there. Then at the approval stage, which is the traditional role, of course, for Parliament, the PBO does provide secretarial services to the Budget Committee of Parliament, and before we will do some analysis, then we make a presentation to the committee based on the draft MTEF that we received from the executive, though it is not formally adopted by Parliament, but we use it as a basis to analyze the annual budget estimates. Then I also want to highlight one important aspect in terms of the legal framework. So we operating in an environment where, whilst Parliament is required to approve the budget, it is not allowed to vary or amend the total estimates that are presented, either on the revenue side or on the expenditure side. The law does, however, allow variations within there, but not the total budget estimates. I think a number of countries have that kind of arrangement. So that's under the framework in which we also operate. Then at the implementation stage, we see a bit of activity there in our office, primarily because parliamentary committees do carry out a number of activities in monitoring the implementation of the budget, and the PBO has been very instrumental in providing the support that the committees require. Specifically, when the budget is being implemented, we have got supplementary estimates that have to come. We do provide support to the budget committee in analyzing the supplementaries. Then there's the issue of excess expenditure. Excess expenditure is that expenditure which is not in the Appropriation Act, but we may require that we incur certain expenditures which are of a national interest, but we do not have to wait for the supplementary to be brought. So the president is allowed to submit a warrant to Parliament, and in our case, it's specifically stated that that warrant has to be submitted to a committee of Parliament, and has to approve that supplementary within 48 hours. So our office has been very active in providing support. We've had to deal with, in the last 2 years, we've had to deal with 2 such presidential warrants, and they were necessitated by, one was the drought that we had in 2015. We had a shortage of a serious reduced capacity in electricity generation, so we had to import power, part of it from South Africa and also from Mozambique. Then the other supplementary presidential warrant that we had to provide support to members was to do with fuel subsidies, petrol and diesel. So our office has dealt with those 2 supplementary warrants in the last 2 years. Then our budget committee is also active in monitoring execution of the budget. By the design of our parliamentary calendar, we only have room to scrutinize the first quarter budget performance. So that one we provide support as well to the Committee on Estimates to carry out this quarterly budget review exercise. Then other portfolio committees also are engaged in oversight of PFM in some way. So they do carry out certain spot checks and pick on any independent studies that they so wish. And we've been very active in providing support. In fact, what we have done is to devise a system where we ask that the committees provide, the committee clerks give us about at least a day or two, in which we take the committee through any topic that they want, about 2 days, so that we appreciate and also make our own presentations on the topics that specifically dealing with public financial management and the budget. Then at audit stage, like my colleague has mentioned, we have the financial report of the Republic that is tabled before Parliament. We have the reports of the Auditor General that come to Parliament, specifically the accounts on the Republic, the accounts on state-owned enterprises, accounts on local authorities, and also performance audits. All these are submitted, and like your portfolio committees, we also request the Public Accounts Committee or any committee that is dealing with this to give us at least a day or two in which we provide some assistance. And for our colleagues that are establishing PBOs, we are also constrained in terms of numbers, very, very constrained. But what we have had to do is to outsource some experts where we do not have the time to do it, or even just the mere technical expertise within the institution. So we do outsource that expertise, and then they assist the committee in doing it. So there are all these ways that we can still maneuver, even if you have a bit of challenge in terms of the numbers, particularly the numbers to get the required skills within the institution. Then going forward, we've also embarked on an exercise which we are yet to see how it will work out. We have got 156 constituencies. And in each constituency, we have got 2 professional staff from Parliament in all the 156. So we're trying to use our staff within the Parliament to be collecting certain information on the budget that can assist us at the approval stage and also in implementation of the budget. So we're trying to use our own structure because we see that it's a big advantage, and we see ourselves even having more eyes on the ground than the executive itself, because we've got 2 staff in each constituency. So we want to leverage on that and just see how it works. So far, we're building the capacity of the staff there so that they can be engaged in collecting some information that is necessary for members to make those informed decisions when they are approving the budget. Thank you very much, Madam.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kateshi, for the eye-opening presentation, coming from your wealth of experience and your academic studies. We really appreciate. Thanks. I will now call upon the last speaker of this session, Mr. I hope I'm calling the right person, Mr. Abu Jabi Pungutu. Am I right? Oh, okay. All right, okay, fine. Sorry, I have 2 programs here. Yes, all right. So, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, I'm presenting Mr. Aminu Abdullah BK. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Permit me to stand on the existing protocol and move ahead straight to my presentation. The Nigerian Parliamentary Budget Office, otherwise known as the National Assembly Budget and Research Office, NABRO, of the Nigerian National Assembly, was established with the aim of providing the National Assembly with objective, timely, and non-partisan analysis needed for economic and budget decisions. The office started operating in 2012 with 12 staff deployed from the National Assembly bureaucracy. And then the office takes effect in that very year. And we operate a bicameral legislature. We have two chambers, the Senate and the Federal House of Representatives. So NABRO provides its functions directly serving two chambers of the National Assembly. Our mandates are as follows: providing objective, independent, unbiased, and non-partisan analysis of the National Assembly budget estimates, assist all committees of the National Assembly with information with respect to budget bills, continuous review of the budget and monitoring of the existing and proposed programs and budget, providing analysis of economic implications of proposed legislations, and make periodic forecast of economic trends and profile alternative fiscal policies. Publish and disseminate information it generates, including reports, analysis, and forecasts, and many other functions as demanded by the legislators. Now, we derived another power that is making the office to operate without any hitch, which is liaising with other government and relevant agencies, institutions, to perform our functions by requesting of information and data, because we use secondary data. We don't collect data. So we use the secondary data in analyzing our reports and publications. Most of these offices are the Central Bank of Nigeria, the National Bureau of Statistics, the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation, the Debts Management Office. These are our major stakeholders we collect data from, and with specific functions on discharging our responsibilities. Let me go straight to the stages of the budget and our rule. And it's in line with what my colleague speakers have mentioned. We already know the four stages: the drafting stroke formulation, the enactment stroke approval, implementation, execution, and then the audit. At each stage, NABRO provides its technical inputs for the benefit of the Nigerian legislature. Nigerian Constitution, Section 81, subsection 1, provided that budget estimates, which consist of projects, programs of the government, should be brought to the National Assembly as a money bill for legislative approval. So immediately this process begins, the National Assembly Budget and Research Office also swings into action in order to give the technical skill gap between the executive and the legislature. The executive will, at the first stage, during the formulation, will release the call circular. The call circular is directing the ministries, departments, and agencies of the government to submit their annual budgetary proposals to the budget office of the Federation, which is under the supervision of the executive. Immediately they release their call circular, NABRO now also starts to formulate its own budget based on the MTEF. We also quickly start preparing our budgets based on the last year and then the approved MTEF, which is to cover within 3 years. We have our estimates and we are waiting for them. And it gets ready, our different sections will start to work to get set for budget defense by different MDAs that are coming for budget defense. Now, at this stage, we review, okay, the budget will be laid in a joint session of the Federal House of the Representatives and the Senate by the President. Immediately the President lays the budget, the proposed budget, we get a copy and swing into action. The first thing we do is to analyze the bill. Sorry, before the bill, the Fiscal Responsibility Act provided that the MTEF stroke medium strategy paper must be submitted to the National Assembly before the bill. So our work starts by examining the MTEF is in accordance with the 3-year. We analyze the expenditure, the revenue targets, the spending limit, the ceilings, and estimates. We also look at the macroeconomic indicators on the MTEF, and then we analyze and submit our recommendation to the legislature, of which now the bill is expected to be laid on the joint session of the chambers. Immediately after that, we swing into action by starting to review the proposal itself. We do a 3-year proposal, a 3-year review of what was submitted 3 years back and what is in the current fiscal year, proposal in the current fiscal year. And then we provide the differentials and analysis for the legislature. And that's how works begin. And then they will start to invite committees. Different committees will start to invite the ministries, departments, and agencies for their budget defense. In the budget defense process, NABRO also supply key ministries, which are in the economic perspective of the government. We supply them with information and data, and then expected submissions by the various MDAs will now be recorded and later analyzed by NABRO and submitted back to the legislature for their inputs and final acceptance or otherwise of the bill. Now also we conduct what is called mapping of capital projects. We still have this wide gap between the recurrent expenditure and the capital expenditure. So we are giving much emphasis on the capital expenditure. How do we manage the little monies available for capital expenditure? This mapping is by mapping out capital projects, their locations, senatorial locations, their costs, their timing. We make it public and publish it in the proposed bill. Likewise, after enactment, we also make that. And that tool has been helping NABRO of recent. We receive comments, we receive challenges. Because we help in opening up the budget. The CSOs are using these mapping documents to request to also make the legislators themselves on their toes. I have seen this project. Why is it not in place? We've seen this in my constituency. So these are the challenges, and these are periodic reports and responses NABRO gets from the public. It's a very important document, the mapping document. At the enactment or approval also, immediately after the budget is approved, we also make the mapping document, and then we analyze the bill and the act, what was brought and what was approved. We analyze it and make it available for the legislature. There also in the implementation or execution, we performed quarterly performance review and analysis of budget. This is strictly with the information we collect from the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. Each quarter, we follow the proposed, especially for capital projects, we follow the budgetary estimates and what was released. We get differentials if there are any. We pass our recommendations, and also the media and the end of year review of the budget. So also the CSOs now are involved in the tracking of the budgets. We now help in designing a template that is acceptable based on what we have in the budget. So the response now from CSO and other members of the public is very, very encouraging. And it helped in not only the legislature, but the general public in seeing the implementation of the fiscal year budget in Nigeria. Also, we conduct the overview public debt profile analysis in the sense that we liaise with the Debt Management Office of Nigeria to see how do we finance the deficit in the budget. Most of them are through borrowings. At times, the fiscal operations will provide for sales of government properties and other privatization to finance the deficit. So we have eyes on that. We conduct an analysis on how payments and other things were done to finance the budget deficit. We also make sure that now we operate on demand-driven approach, because initially we do analysis of things we thought would be useful to the legislature. We now realize that when they're in demand, they appreciate more. So demand-driven feedback is what we operate in the National Assembly Budget and Research Office, and it is creating synergy between our office and the two chambers of the National Assembly. Finally, in audit, the Auditor General of the Federation is mandated also through Section 85 of the Constitution to provide the two chambers, the two public accounts committees with reports of auditing each year. So NABRO also collects audit report of that year, that fiscal year, analyze, make our own submission to the legislature itself. So in a nutshell, in these 4 stages of the budget cycle, that's what NABRO does. Thank you very much.
On time. Thank you so much, Mr. Abdullahi BK. Thank you for the informative presentation. Honorable members, ladies and gentlemen, we have been listening to 3 informative presentations. I am now going to allow you to reflect on the 3 presentations and interrogate them. The ball is in your hands. Since I don't know your names, I will then give you numbers. Number 1, number 2, number 2, number 3. You say number 3? Okay. Let's allow the 3 to intervene, and then we will then take the next round. Number 1.
Okay, thank you very much. My questions go to both Uganda and Nigeria, but specifically starting from experience from Uganda. And my question here is on the very objective of PBO. And we know that PBO exists so that to help parliamentarians to have an informed decision. So when you look, for example, for Uganda for quite some time now, if you go back and then become a normal citizen, what do you see? The decision of the parliamentarians. Because you know in the African way, especially where I come, there are sometimes that members of parliament take a decision just because of their party, either it is a ruling party or opposition. So they don't even care about these technical aspects. They just take it because some of them, they ignore that we don't follow what actually we have been to. So we are just following. So when you see, when you evaluate the works of PBO, how it has helped to make sure that even those who are in a ruling party, when it comes to issues of discussion, they discuss with informed decision. Also, in Uganda, what has been your relationship with civil society organizations, especially to foster that kind of program? Is there any intervention with you? Yeah, maybe like at least for Nigeria, I happen to know. But if I want to know for Uganda, what has it been your relationship with the civil society organization, especially working on issues of capacity and other accountability programs? Thank you.
Number 2.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'd like to thank number 3 even before your intervention, because I'm not the one standing between here and the cocktail. So that's on you. Thank you. But thank you very much for the presentations. Very impressive report of what you're doing. It, I think, leaves all of us wondering what size is the army that is working for the PBOs, because it sounds like there's a lot being done. So would like to hear more later about that. But my question here is actually now more about, for Uganda, you mentioned something that was stuck with me on, you said you do analysis of 2 things. You do an induction of members of parliament. So for me, it's interesting because we also have this question about what is the role of PBO in building capacity of parliamentarians themselves. You mentioned you induct members of parliament, so discuss their role in transparency, openness, participation. I don't know if you mentioned that. Those are some of the areas that UNICEF supports in Mozambique in general as well. And the other issues you mentioned, you doing analysis on gender and equity. And that's actually something that I have been thinking about, and maybe I should have raised on the previous plenary session, on perhaps what is the role of PBO as bodies that produce independent and neutral research to inform debate of parliamentarians in shedding a light on the issue of inequities within the countries, between the different constituencies, inequities in outcome, inequities of allocations and appropriations. What is the role of a PBO to objectively shed a light on those issues that it was actually would have fit in the previous session because it was on development path in Africa, and we see a lot of inequities growing as countries have been growing. We actually see growing inequities, and I think PBO has a role to play there. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, clarity-seeking question. I will now call upon number 3. Number 3, can I pick up anyone? Yes, please. Please.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
The new number 3. I think for me 2 issues. The first one is I think ultimately there's a lot of good work that is being done. The presentations are sometimes very scary on the type of work that has been done and the road that has been traveled. The role of Parliament, the work of the PBO has to coincide with all of the role of Parliament and all of the phases, particularly around the budget, from planning and so on, the whole cycle. But around this cycle of audit, I wanted to know more about what do you do with audit, and do you do the audit in terms of oversight over the executive, or that stage of audit is audit of what the work the AG has done. So I think that's where
there's confusion for me, but I think the rest of the stuff is very exciting. Thank you.
For question, I will now allow the speakers to respond.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Now, how do I see, or how do we see the decisions of Parliament before and after the Budget Office, or before the Budget Office was in place? Today, the Parliament of Uganda is more vigilant in the budget process. In the last appropriation, Parliament was able to cause amendments to budget up to 3%, which was not there before. Previous years, it was 0.2, 0.3%, and in other years, there was nothing. But it's coming up and it's growing. And where the amendments coming from our reports, indicating inadequacies of allocations, areas of which are actually ignored. The executive will not give all the information to Parliament. That's not in their interest. And this is what we dig out. We dig out and give to the MPs, and that's how they become more vigilant. Today, a meeting probably cannot proceed without a budget officer in the meeting. They'll call and say, please, we need somebody here because we are going to face the executive. We are not sure of what they are going to tell us. You are our eye, you are our ear, please be around. So that's how most of the decisions now are made, because of what the members actually, if two people stood on the floor, a budget officer and an officer from the executive, they will believe the budget officer and not the executive. Now, the relationship between PBO and the CSOs, this has been on for some time. I just left it out. We have a strong linkage for the last 10 years. We actually facilitated this linkage between the CSOs and Parliament. At first, we used to provide them with the capacities to understand, to appreciate, to examine some particular areas, gray areas in the executive's budget. Today, we actually facilitate them to meet the committees, to make presentations, the committees on various issues. And today they have an advocacy group, which is called the CSBAG, Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group in Uganda. And it's one of our initiatives. Now, gender and equity certificates. The law in Uganda provides that all budgets and estimates submitted must subscribe to gender and equity considerations. So we have an Equity and Equal Opportunities Commission, which is assigned to examine these documents, ministerial policy statements, the annual budget, budget framework paper, and pronounce itself on the gender and equity issues. They do it in a way of even scoring marks for each spending agency, whether the budgets and estimates actually are compliant. So what's our role? Is to review the methodology they have used, whether it's actually capturing what the budget law is specifying, and also to alert the MPs about the scores, whether they are adequate or not. And if there are actions that are required to be taken, then we advise them so. Audit. In the audit, budget office will be called back to verify. We don't do the audit, but we look at the reports from the Auditor General that come to Parliament. When the documents come to Parliament for debate. The budget office is called back to ascertain on the appropriated numbers, the objectives of the appropriation, and financial use, how it was actually, the money was used, value for money, whether the objectives were met. So this is what we do. And our submissions usually are used to not only to remind, but to pin the MDAs about the regional position, now the Auditor General's report, and what do you have to say? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your response. Any other response? Okay. Sir, you may come in.
I think the one that I can respond to is on the link with Auditor General's office reports, because I think that's where the clarification is. Like my colleague from Uganda has mentioned, the audit report itself is what we use as the document in our analysis, and also to see, to check what sort of capacity, that is the committee itself have not requested. But we under the past 2 years, our experience has that actually it's the Public Accounts Committee that has been requesting for assistance now. So the demand is there already. So we do not really have to struggle to see what we need to do for them. So, but just to give some very practical examples. Recently we had an audit report on capital, on infrastructure, and specifically on roads. So, very technical area, and most of the members were not very familiar with, so they requested for some assistance. So what the PBO did, like I mentioned, is that we do not have we do not have staff that have got that technical engineering capacity. So we outsourced, just an independent consultants who came in and then they took the committee through the report. But what we also did was to ensure that the consultants sat through all the meetings up to the end, so that they could assist with it. And you know, the experience was such that the concerned contracts that were under query, you could come, you know, dispute all sorts of tests that were done on the road to assess the durability or the specifications, and you know, if we didn't have that intervention, it was easy to convince members using technical language that they were operating within the specification. But through that intervention, then we had to at least we needed to provide that the technical aspect of it. The same happens with reports on parastatal bodies. Some of the institutions that are audited, I'll pick one example. For example, the telecommunications, the state-owned telecommunications company operating as a cell phone provider. This is an area where, this is a sector or a business where all other businesses are making money. You have MTN there, it's reporting. You have Airtel there, it's making profit. But the state-owned company is the only one making losses. So you try to bring in experts from the industry, and they take the committee through, so that you identify certain weaknesses in this state-owned enterprise. Why should it not operate the way the private-led companies are operating? So we get that kind of intervention. So we do not really carry out the audit, but we pick the audit, then get the issues that are related. But like I said, we've been lucky in that it's the community itself that is demanding the services from the PBO. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your response.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I want to comment on the gender budgeting as raised by the lady. The National Assembly Budget and Research Office, NABRO, went for an intensive special training on gender budgeting. To the extent now we have a unit headed by our staff that is in charge of gender budgeting. So in each fiscal year, we look at the budget proposal, extract gender budgeting, anything that is related to gender issues. We are treated separately, and then we work in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Women Affairs, with our gender team, gender desk, to see on their affirmative request demand each year. Is it in line with the budgetary provision? And also to look at the development plan of the government, where the provision of the gender issues are, and then match it with what is in the fiscal year budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the responses. I just want to check if there are follow-up questions. Any new questions? You may come in.
Right, I just want to add on the issue of audit reports from the Auditor General's office. As the Parliamentary Budget Office, what we do is, when these reports are tabled before Parliament, they will be mainly in 3 volumes. First, the appropriation and fund accounts, and then the one for state enterprises and parastatals, and also the one for local authorities. These reports will be in thick volumes, such that the Parliamentary Budget Office needs to provide simplified analysis, brief and straightforward, so that the members of Parliament and also the media and the general public understand what is being said in these reports. So we provide that short analysis and also put in some pictorial diagrams, the bar graphs, the pie charts. What we have seen for the short period that we have been in existence is that people do not like to read those thick volume reports. So they need something which is simplified and to provide some pictorial diagrams which are straightforward. And also on the issue of audit reports, we also analyze the implementation of audit recommendations over the years. Say from, we can say, 2015, 2016, 2017, we analyze ministry by ministry or government department by government department or state enterprise to say how is it implemented the recommendations from the Auditor General's report. And you can provide like bar graphs to say the number of recommendations made and those that have been implemented, those that are still in progress, and those that have not been implemented. So now to a member of Parliament, it will be very short and to the point. One can see from the diagram which ministries or which state enterprises are having problems in implementing their audit recommendations and would want to know why. And also, we can also do analysis of the audit opinions that would have been that would have occurred over the years, say ministry by ministry, to say, are they improving on in terms of the audit opinions issued by the Auditor General? Say, in 1 year, a ministry can be issued an adverse opinion. And now maybe in 2016 is now an unqualified opinion, then there's progress. But you see some other ministries still maintaining maybe the adverse opinion, then the members of parliament would now need to know where is the problem and how is that ministry taking the audit recommendations. So generally, I can say from the Zimbabwean side, those are the kind of analysis that we do. We would also want to venture into like Mr. Kateshi was saying, the audits of projects, romping in some engineers or some technical experts in the various areas to say, if it's a road, you can also do an audit with the help of the technical experts to see how well the money has been used. Has there been value for money? Yes, so thank you.
Well, honorable members, observations are that we have now exhausted all the questions. And indeed, we must thank the speakers for responding adequately to the questions raised by your good self. Which then leads me to my little closing remarks on the presentations and the responses that were provided. Well, honorable members, the topic addressed by the speakers in this session is the role of PBO in the budget cycle and the fiscal oversight. From the presentations that were given this afternoon, we have learned that effective parliaments are a pillar of a quality democracy. Hence, the capacity of parliaments to actively intervene in the budget process, not only in its adoption, but also in its elaboration and in monitoring spending, is an indication of its effectiveness. The message carried in the presentation presentations is that the creation of PBOs within Parliament is an institutional innovation that will enable the legislature to engage in the budget process in a more objective, effective, and responsible manner. But also, since national budgets often tend to be large, complex, and difficult to understand by the parliamentarians, the need, therefore, to build budget expertise within Parliament cannot be overemphasized. PBOs can contribute in the budget cycle in many ways, including the following: in the analysis of the budget presented by the executive, simplifying complex budget information provided by the executives so that legislators can understand and use it effectively. So more assertive parliaments need more expert staff to meet their information needs, faster, more effective, and better coordinated administrative systems. The other importance of the PBOs is that they can analyze and estimate the financial impact of any proposal that relates to a matter over which Parliament has jurisdiction on request of any member or any parliamentary committee. PBOs can become a permanent source of information and analysis for parliamentarians,
regarding the fiscal impact on public policies. It's also important to note that PBO's fiscal focus not only provide an independent data point on the health of nations' and finances for parliamentarians, think tanks, and economic journalists, but in many cases, PBOs publish their method of calculation and projections, encouraging simplification and transparency and making budget focus easier to understand and more credible. Lastly, PBOs are specialized units within the legislative branch that are supposed to produce objective budgetary, fiscal, and programmatic information to the legislators. I'm sure you will agree with me that we have been empowered this afternoon. Come the next oversight function, we will use this information and be effective and make an impact in our work. Thank you very much for listening to the presentations by the speakers. We have now come, you will see that I have taken your time on, it's your, let me see where, yeah, cocktail before dinner. I'm sure you didn't need this one. So now we are all ready to go and enjoy our dinner. Now dinner will be served in the same venue where we had our lunch. Thank you very much, honorable members. Our meeting stands adjourned. Thank you. I didn't disappoint you, eh?
No, not at all. It was excellent.
I didn't disappoint you, eh?
No,